talk, we're not talking about super awesome technical details on an editor that we invented. We want to talk about our experiences in delivering hands-on high-quality computer science education to mostly the underserved students that we have done in the past couple of years in Houston, Texas. Okay, so a little bit about me. If you ask me teaching kids on how to do programming and coding is what I wanted to do 5 years ago, I'd be like, oh, are you crazy? And I was kind of thrown into it, starting at a makerspace where I taught things like laser cutting and 3D printing, and eventually I ended up at the Houston Public Library where I was part of the community engagement team. We went around different pockets, like a school or another library or a church, an apartment, where we delivered basic technology training as well as fun coding things like blink a light with a Raspberry Pi or Lego Mindstorms. And it was then that I realized that it's really humbling experience because I'm used to going to technology meetups where people will argue about, oh, we should use this library, or what is dynamic typing? And in these classes, I thought that, oh, hey, maybe Steve was onto something when he's like, oh, the mouse should only have one button. So we want to talk about today on the kind of programs that we deliver at Code Park Houston, our mission and what we learned, in the hopes that you will be empowered to go out there in your community to deliver sort of a hands-on workshop like we do. Okay, so I'm gonna, Amanda is a co-founder, and I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
I'm Amanda, and I started out getting into development out of school, and when I was learning to code, kind of the thing that motivated me was being able to make my blog how I wanted it to look in middle school. So there was this real kind of feedback and motivation. Every time I saved the HTML and refresh, I got to see, oh, this turned pink, or this turned purple. And that really excited me. And I remember that to this day because it's something that we can point out to the kids. When they change one line of code, they can see that immediately. And so I also, when I went into development, I thought, okay, yeah, I'm going to be an engineer forever. But as I was doing that, I was going out to a lot of meetups. I met a lot of Rails developers. And then I had a friend who signed up to Houston to run Rails Girls. But he didn't know people to come in and coach. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go talk to all my meetup friends at the Ruby Brigade and make them come and teach. And it was just so much fun and really exciting to see kind of people that were more experienced working with people who were just beginning and really welcoming them into the community. And so that really lit a fire in me to go and try and do more teaching and organizing more workshops. So that's where we are today. Yeah.
Okay, and here is a sample of
what happens in the classroom. We just started drawing pictures, and the kids all got excited, and they ran up to come and draw their own picture on the whiteboard as well.
Yeah. Okay, so these are some examples of the creative coding workshops we do at Code Park Houston, in addition to adult workshops like Intro to Git and GitHub. And there's a common theme in all of these, right? And that is the creative coding process. And we emphasize on moving students from being consumers of technology to really being the creators, right? We think that coding and programming is the invisible language around us. We all know how to use an iPhone, but we don't know how it works. We all know how to, I guess, go on the internet and go on a website, but not all of us know how to make that website. And we aim to demystify the process by allowing students to own the learning process with creative coding in a community-based mindset. And we'll talk about what that is. Okay, so what does creative coding mean? It means you type a line of code, and a circle appears, right? Okay, and you change that line of code a little bit, and the circle follows the mouse on a canvas. This is P5.js. It's an online code editor that we use. And there is a Python version, but you have to download processing the program. And we find that what works the best for us is to use a browser-based thing that is accessible. So when we go out to the community centers, we can say, hey, we just need internet. We just need a laptop. We don't need to spin up anything to do stuff. So, okay, that's not very exciting though, right? Okay, we made some circles appear, and then what? But if you add different color circles and you put it in a loop and you throw it in a function, mad emojis appear. So this is a sketch that was made by one of our students named Rose. She was at the Leonel Castillo Community Center where we piloted our first creative coding workshop last year. And by the end, she was able to be intrinsically motivated to do something like this because creative coding gives us the context in which we can talk about why we want to do this a little bit, right? So instead of saying, this is a loop, it just runs forever and forever, we're able to put a context on top of the concept by saying, this is a loop if you want to draw your emoji over and over again on a screen. With the creative coding process, we're able to provide a goal-oriented approach to why we want to write the program the way we do. I know the way that I was taught in my first computer science class in college was, do you guys remember those stars you have to draw with a for loop inside a for loop? And I'm like, what am I doing with my life? So with these great learning platforms like drawing emojis, or when we concentrate on the visuals and also the sketching process, we find that it's very successful with students when we can say, okay, we're doing this sketch, and this is exactly what happens when you sketch one line of code. Now, okay, let's go on. Yep. Okay. And really, it's that media-rich learning experience that we want to enable in our technology education classroom that makes our students say, hey, we want to learn this. After they're engaged by giant emojis exploding across the screen, or a car running, we want them to want to continue to do this and not give up because they think it's fun and they think it's interesting, right? And part of the creative coding process, and I'm gonna instead of talking about myself, I'm gonna let Allison, one of our other students, tell you that this is also at Baker Ripley Leonel Castillo Community Center. She said that I like that we use computers and learn a bit more about what they can do. At the beginning of a class, they give us a question of the day. Once we know that, we learn how to use it and make the project. So in each one of our sessions, if it's a long-term session, we emphasize on the creation process because there's a lot of commonality between a drawing and actually coding, right? And we give them a design journal. It is a reflection process so that number one, they can know and contextualize what they learned. And number two, they're able to go back to it and like, oh, hey, this is the syntax for that weird thing we did. So if I can draw a cat with this, I can draw a dog or something like that, right? And the previous session was from, So the previous session was from a class we did at the beginning. We'll ask something like, how might a computer remember things? And that leads in nicely to a lesson on binaries. And then we'll move on, right? So in the beginning, we ask a question, and they'll do a project. And we also ask them to reflect. We'll have questions like, what do you want to do with your project? And what was hard about it? And we find that students are able to develop communication skills and also remember things better, basically. Yeah. And we give them colorful notebooks, and and they're able to decorate it. And Melissa loves her design journaling experience. And it's really cute when we just lay out all the notebooks in the beginning of the class, and they come out and they get it, and they'll start writing the answers to the question we have on the board. Okay. And the next one I want to talk about, taking the kind of creative coding process and experience beyond the screen, is with physical computing. Like so many of the previous presenters have mentioned, we use the Raspberry Pi to also give context to what they're doing. Instead of saying, okay, so this is a while true loop, it means it's running forever and ever. We'll say that, hey, we blinked the LED once, now we want to do it over and over and over again without our having to type it over and over again. And that immediate visual feedback with a physical component that can be touched really is something that motivates students. Same with the Makey on the photo right here. This is the Makey circuit board. It's based on Arduino, where you basically turn humans into buttons. So the idea is you high-five someone and a cat meows or something. And we also find that it's a very good teaching tool because it helps students gain immediate visual and auditory feedback and providing context in the code that they've written. Okay. So this is one of the demos that we did with the Makey, where we'll have students like play flowers, and when they come up, we'll say, hey, would you like to hold a flower? And there's a huge joy and surprise when I high-five them and the scratch meow sound comes up. And it's like, oh, hey, I did scratch. And I'm like, oh, do you know you can do this too? You should come take a class. Yeah. Okay, and so we talk about the creative coding process and how that really enables students to have a goal-oriented design approach to what do I want to do, draw it in a notebook, and now transfer it to the computer. The next important aspect that we do in all of our workshop is the emphasis on community, right? Because when we, all the MOOC courses online, I don't know about you guys, but I signed up for so many of those and never finished any of them. And I think it says something about how learning really is a collaboration process, right? And let's talk about, okay. And our goal for every single class is to enable a positive, collaborative, and learning environment. We want students to not feel discouraged when they learn coding. And what does that look like? We talked about the tools in terms of the process we used, and now we want to talk about what a classroom should feel like, right? And number one is we make mistakes, okay? Making mistakes is how students learn, and we want to iterate that process faster and say it's okay to make mistakes. When we're teaching, we do a lot of live coding and demoing in front of the screen, and sometimes we forget something. And I've been to a lot of tech demos where they're like, oh, I made a mistake, and then they'll just sit there and type furiously for about 5 minutes. And I'm like, what's going on, guys? And in all of our classes, when we mistype something or something doesn't work, we verbalize through the problem-solving process. And that shows to students that, number one, it's okay to make mistakes, and they won't want to give up so easily when something doesn't work, right? In a traditional school classroom setting, because we're not in the United Kingdom, this is America, no. In a traditional class setting, students are taught there is the right answer and there's the wrong answer. And that's not what programming is like. It's about the problem-solving process, and what we want to do is we want to model the problem-solving process. And they say, oh, hey, there's a teacher who is supposed to have all the answers, and they did something wrong. And instead of like giving up or blaming the equipment, like I still do sometimes, whatever, we say that, oh, it's okay. Sometimes it doesn't work. Let me check this and let me check that and see what that process is like. Providing the positive, collaborative, and creative learning environment it's really hard, but it's really not. Like the key really is to model the behavior that you want to see in your students and take advantage of their natural tendency to mimic, okay? So when they see us, the teachers who's supposed to have the answers to know everything, not give up on the stuff that we have done, or experiment with the code and just say, oh, hey, let me see what this looks like. Let me see what that looks like. They tend to also model that behavior. Okay, and number 2 is be Mr. Rogers, right? So Mr. Rogers is a 90s, maybe 90s? Yeah, television, 2000s? Thank you. Earlier, oh no, okay, so I grew up watching Mr. Rogers. I don't remember, but in the 90s, in the 90s. And really, when our students come into the classroom, we'll greet them. We always have a smile, and we ask them how they feel today. And at the end of the class, I will say, okay, I will see you next Thursday. And really, the magic to me about Mr. Rogers is that, you know, he's always there for you, and it's okay to feel frustrated, right? And it's about overcoming your challenges and difficulties, and in really just kind of that positive and encouraging attitude that Mr. Rogers has, in that positive and encouraging learning environment. Okay, and the last one I'll talk about is actually surprisingly customer service, right? So, and a lot of teachers, one thing that I personally learned doing a lot of years of teaching is in the beginning, I was very gung-ho. I was like, you must finish this. This is what you must do. This is, our project is, the goal of the class is we have to have a completed like a robotics project. And it turns out that that's not what I should be doing. It's really about allowing students to own the learning process. So think about excellent customer service and think about our students, and let's empathize with them. You don't know how to type, right? And everything looks kind of scary. And we employ customer service strategies. So we do things like, instead of saying, oh, the computer runs code in order and your code is out of order, we might say, hey, the computer runs code out of order, can you double check on that? And what that does is it shifts the blame to not what the student is doing. It's saying it, and it's also giving them the power to say, I can fix this if I want, right? So instead of saying, hey, the browser you need to refresh the page to reload the code, we'll say, instead of we'll say, the browser loads the code, doesn't load the code unless you refresh the page. Might you try that? So it's number 1, not talking in a statement, and number 2, not placing blame on the students and you did this wrong, you did that wrong, and you did that wrong. And in the beginning, I was like, so I also do a lot of Raspberry Pi meetups. I host one in Houston. In the beginning, I was very like, oh, I know more than you. This is what I'm doing. And then you eventually find out that it's a very rewarding experience to say, oh, hey, what everyone's doing is pretty cool. And we want to create that kind of collaborative learning environment by employing customer service skills. Okay, so if we've done our job successfully, maybe each one of our long-term sessions, whether we're doing like a VR thing or a Raspberry Pi thing, we'll curate a community show and tell experience for our students. So Jareth here, like myself, we're both super into Pokemon. So here he is talking about Pokemon cards that we have, and it's a really great thing to see small children develop that kind of leadership and communication skill, and that they're able to, number 1, collaborate with each other, and number 2, verbalize the process in which what they want done versus what is currently happening, and really differentiating that is, why is this happening? It is is a skill that I think is really important for programmers in general. Okay, cool. And if what I'm saying sounds like preaching to the choir for you, that's because you probably read Mitchell Resnick's book on lifelong kindergarten. And I'm gonna let Amanda talk more about the kind of community building we do before I wrap it up. Okay, cool.
So just like how we learned from Mitchell Resnick, there's just so many. It's really cool to read these books and see even the authors themselves referring to other authors, and there's just this great community around educators. And in that same vein, built into a lot of these platforms now, people are bringing in that community element, that kind of ability for students to look at each other's works in the Scratches studios, and also to be able to remix each other's work. Same thing on the Open Processing website where we did our creative coding class. And this is really neat, right? Because this is the same thing that we see in the developer community, which is around, like on Git and GitHub, our code is up there. We get to fork each other's projects and be inspired by each other's code. The same transparency and remixing and development and community is in these tools that we get to share with the students. So they get introduced to that really early on. And as a part of it, we teach them about how to make comments on each other's projects online and what it means to be encouraging and think about how to give critique. And these are all such important skills beyond that kind of just what is it that I'm trying to get the computer to do, because at the end of the day, it's about us being humans and us using the languages as tools. And in the same vein, right, like it doesn't matter if it's Scratch or Python or JavaScript or whatever. The idea is these are all ways for us and students to express themselves. And all, like, really, I think that, or we believe that at the end of the day, like creativity is a universal language that kind of can be expressed in all these different ways. And just really seeing that this line or this block enables us to draw this line, and that visual feedback really helps students see, oh, wow, I'm able to express to a computer what to do. And so an example of this is back in 2013, I was talking with somebody and they were sharing about Lego Robotics, and I was like, oh man, that's awesome. I mean, I love Legos. I didn't know you could do robots and Legos and also coding. That's really neat. What are kids crazy about these days? Oh, Minecraft. I think we should learn and see if there's anything about Minecraft to teach with. And sure enough, with a Google search, we found like the Craig Robinson Minecraft pie recipe cards that he was just starting to put out that year. And it was like, hey, let's go and try this. Let's go and teach this with kids. And what we saw was really this kind of a mix between the serendipity that you spoke about earlier and being able to come up with the problems to motivate the students in this Minecraft world that they were already in love with. We got them to do Python, type it out in, and at that time it was in IDLE, and they were motivated to work through the bugs to see things like, okay, I found this really cool part of the world that I want to teleport to. How do I do that? Well, you can do, let's learn that as a class. Let's go and set our position there. And all these things to kind of motivate from that point into, hey, we built our own house. How do we save the different positions that we're at? And now we're talking about variables. So each of the problems that we set up in the Minecraft world had a computer principle behind it, but because the incentives and the visual feedback and that love was there in the beginning, we were able to bring in the other things. And it's so much fun to see, because once we get into setting blocks, students get together and they're like, what block is doing this one? Which one is the one with the flowing lava? And it turns into almost like a class project organically to figure out which block is doing what. And it's overall rewarding. Not only do I do we get to live vicariously through the students experiencing the magic of coding, we also get to see them teaching each other and their parents and all of that. And the thing is, just like we're saying about how we're standing on the shoulders of giants, there's all these resources out there, like CS First, Scratch, Girls Who Code, codeclub.org, and technovationchallenge.org, and so many others that have different approaches and different languages that you can take and go and run with and just bring to your community and say, hey, I want the students here to be exposed to coding, and I want to try this curriculum. And these resources have like slides, and all the ones that were shared before as well have slides and lesson plans and different things like that. And so to wrap up.
Okay, so yeah, our call to action for you is think about using the creative coding process in your pocket of a community. And it's really not about how much you know about the language details of Python or any other thing. It's about our attitude and using that encouraging tone to inspire the next generation of diverse learners, right? And to also wrap up on how much of a rewarding experience it is like for you, we find that some of the volunteers that teach with us, they'll say things like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And at the end of the day, being able to really teach it helps you as a developer as well. It was Aristotle who said, you don't really understand something. No, sorry, it was Einstein who said, you don't really understand something until you can explain it to your grandmother. And for us, it's like you don't really understand something in Python unless you can explain like maybe data types to an 8-year-old, right? So it's about the rewarding experience for you as a teacher as well. And believe it or not, for me, I'm not always this charming and engaging of a speaker. So you also learn a lot of professional skills that are relevant, whether you're doing a talk or a workshop like this. And we'll take the Q&A at the end, but we just threw this little bit up there on what codepark.py is about and this new cool editor that we found. Yeah, okay. And that's it for lightning talks. I guess lightning talks, okay.